What happens when a wealthy businessman insults a waitress in a language he assumes she cannot understand, only for her to respond back in that same language without missing a beat? Have you ever noticed how one single sentence, one careless moment, can completely shift the energy inside a room? That is exactly what unfolded on a warm Thursday afternoon inside an upscale restaurant in Scottsdale, Arizona. The kind of place where everything gleamed. Marble surfaces, dark polished wood tables, soft background music that whispered money without ever saying the word out loud. The staff moved with precision, balancing trays and keeping smiles steady through long double shifts. That is where we meet Maya Caldwell. She was not the kind of waitress who faded into the walls. She moved through the dining floor with quiet confidence, her natural hair pinned back neatly, her notepad always ready, her smile genuine but measured. The regulars knew her by name. She had a way of noticing people, remembering what they ordered last time, asking about their kids or their week. She was not just delivering plates. She was paying attention. But the man sitting at the corner table near the window that afternoon was not the kind of man who noticed people like Maya. His name was Rashid Al-Farouk, a billionaire property developer visiting from overseas, in town for a string of high-value meetings. His suit was tailored so precisely it looked like it had been sewn directly onto his body. His watch was heavy, gold, and caught the light every time he moved his wrist. Everything about him announced that he expected the world to move around him, not the other way around. When Maya walked over to greet him, the air between them shifted almost immediately. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome. Can I get you started with something to drink?" she asked, pen ready, voice professional and warm. Rashid did not look up at first. He kept his eyes fixed on his phone screen like whatever was on it mattered far more than the person standing in front of him. After a few long seconds, he glanced up, gave her a quick look up and down, and said flatly, "Water. With lemon. That is all. No please, no thank you," just a clipped instruction delivered like a command to someone beneath him. Maya gave the practiced nod that restaurant workers learn after months of managing all kinds of customers. "Of course. I will have that right out." She turned away, and in that exact moment Rashid leaned toward the younger man seated across from him, an associate named Tariq who was clearly there to take notes and stay quiet, and muttered something in Arabic. The tone alone was enough. Even without understanding a word, you could hear the mockery in it. It was the kind of remark people make when they are absolutely certain no one around them will understand. Maya brought the water back, setting the glass down carefully. She kept her expression neutral, but her eyes caught the edge of his expression. She had spent enough years around Arabic to recognize its rhythms, its sharpness, and she had heard enough to know that what he had just said was not a compliment. Something quiet began to build inside her. Not visible, not yet. Just steady, like distant thunder. Rashid did not notice. He was back on his phone, tossing another Arabic comment toward Tariq. A short laugh followed. He believed he was the smartest person at the table, in the room, probably in the building. That is the thing about arrogance. It fills up all the space where awareness should live, and it blinds you to the truth sitting right across from you. What Rashid did not know was that Maya Caldwell had a history he never could have guessed. He did not know that after her parents separated when she was young, she had gone to live with her maternal grandmother in Morocco. He did not know that Arabic was not a language she had studied in a classroom. It was the language of her childhood. The language her grandmother used to call her in for dinner, to tell her stories before bed, to teach her prayers and proverbs and the kind of wisdom that does not come from books. He did not know she had spoken it every single day for years. He did not know she had understood every word he said from the moment she approached the table. Maya returned to check on them, her composure fully intact. "Have you had a chance to look over the menu?" she asked, directing the question to both men. Rashid finally set his phone down and looked at her directly. There was a challenge in his eyes, the look of someone who had never really been told no. "Bring me the lamb," he said. And make sure it is not overcooked. I do not trust kitchens in this country. Maya wrote it down without comment. She turned to Tariq, who finally spoke, his tone noticeably more polite than his boss, almost apologetic. I will have the salmon, please. Thank you. Maya smiled genuinely in his direction. Of course. Would you prefer rice or vegetables? Vegetables, please, he replied, clearly relieved to be spoken to like a person. As she walked away, Rashid's laughter followed her again. Another remark in Arabic, flicked at her back like something casual, like she was not even there. But she heard it. Every word. At the server station, her coworker Damon raised an eyebrow. Everything okay over there? He asked quietly. Maya gave a small shrug. Some people look right through you, she said. They see the uniform, not the person wearing it. She handed the order slip to the kitchen, then stood at the counter for a moment. Her heart was steady. She had trained herself for that. But something inside her had made a decision. This particular man, on this particular afternoon, was about to encounter something he was completely unprepared for. She walked back out to the floor. A few minutes later, Maya returned with a bread basket and a small dish of butter, a standard courtesy the restaurant offered all its guests. She set it down gently in front of Rashid. Here is some bread while your meal is being prepared, she said. Rashid looked at the basket as though it had personally offended him. Then he turned to Tariq and said in Arabic, just loud enough for Maya to catch it clearly, cheap, just like the one serving it. Maya's hand stilled for just a breath. Those words did not slide off. They hit, the way a calculated insult always does. She had heard rougher things before, but this was different. It was not about the bread. It was about her. Tariq's eyes darted anxiously in her direction. He had heard it too and clearly understood, but he said nothing. He kept his gaze on the tablecloth. His silence was its own answer. Maya straightened, gave a polite nod, and said simply, enjoy. Then she turned and walked a few steps toward the center of the room. And that is when Rashid, still not satisfied, still convinced he was safe inside his assumed language barrier, leaned back and said it louder. Look at the way she carries herself, like this place belongs to her. A waitress with attitude. She thinks bringing plates to tables makes her somebody. The words floated through the air. A couple at the nearest table tilted their heads, not understanding the words but reading the tone with no difficulty. You do not need a translation to recognize contempt. Maya stopped walking. Her back was to his table. Her eyes landed on the far wall. She gripped her notepad just a little tighter. Those words were not just an insult. They were an echo of something she had encountered her whole life. People making assumptions about who she was based on what they could see, never stopping to ask what they could not. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she turned back around. Back at the table, Tariq shifted in his seat again, his discomfort growing. Maybe we should lower our voices, he murmured to Rashid. Rashid dismissed this with a wave of his hand. Why? She does not understand a word. He gestured toward Maya with a flick of his wrist. People like her never do. He was completely certain of his invisibility in that language. He had spent years using it as a private channel, a space where he could say what he really thought without consequence. He was about to discover that channel had always been open. Maya approached the table again to refill the water. She lifted the pitcher, poured slowly, and when the glass was full she set it down without a sound. She met Rashid's eyes. He leaned forward, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth, and then in Arabic he said the thing that crossed every line. She should be grateful we even let her work here. A woman like that belongs in the back, not standing in front of me. The room did not hear the words. But everyone in it felt the shift. Tariq dropped his gaze to his lap. The man at the table beside them glanced over, sensing something sharp in the air. Maya set the pitcher down. No slam, no dramatic pause. Just quiet, deliberate control. She took one step back from the table. And then she opened her mouth and spoke. Softly at first. In Arabic. Fluid, natural, unhurried Arabic. Would you like more bread, sir, or are the insults filling enough for you? The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Rashid's phone nearly slipped from his hand. His head snapped up. The smirk was gone. In its place was something he had probably never worn in a restaurant in his life. Confusion. Discomfort. The very beginning of shame. Tariq's mouth fell open. He looked between Rashid and Maya like a man watching a building fall in slow motion. You speak Arabic, he managed. Maya looked directly at Rashid. Fluently, she said. Still in Arabic. Still calm. Still completely in control. People at neighboring tables did not understand the words, but they understood something had just happened. Forks hovered over plates. Conversations died mid-sentence. The entire room leaned in. Rashid forced a short laugh. It came out hollow. Oh, so you picked up a few phrases from the internet. Very impressive. Maya did not blink. I picked it up from my grandmother, who raised me in Casablanca. I have understood every single word you have said to this man since I walked up to your table. Tariq pressed his hand over his mouth. A woman at the next table touched her chest. The man beside her shook his head slowly. They did not need translation. They could see it in Rashid's face, in Tariq's body language, in the absolute stillness that had settled over the restaurant. Maya took one more step toward the table. Her voice stayed low, but it carried. You assumed that my uniform made me invisible. You assumed that because you wore a tailored suit and I carried a notepad, you had the right to speak about me the way you did. But I want you to understand something. Respect is not something you get to switch off depending on who you think is listening. Rashid's lips opened, then closed. A man who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts, who had spoken in front of boardrooms and government officials, had nothing. Tariq leaned slightly forward and whispered in Arabic, barely audible, Rashid, this needs to stop. Rashid found his voice again, though it had lost its edge. You misunderstood me. Maya switched to English cleanly, without hesitation, so that every person in the room could hear what came next. No, she said. I did not. A low ripple moved through the restaurant. People looked at each other. Some shook their heads. Some whispered. One woman near the back pressed her lips together like she was holding something in. Rashid sat rigid in his chair. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he had no exit. No authority to summon, no language to hide behind. He was exposed in the most ordinary of places, a restaurant table, by the most ordinary of people, the woman who had brought his water. He tried again, his tone shifting, softer now and more careful. Money decides power. That is the reality of the world we live in. Maya tilted her head slightly. Money may buy the best table in the room. But it has never once bought respect. That is the one thing you have to earn. His jaw tightened. His fork stabbed at the bread on the plate. His movements were sharp and restless, the gestures of a man who no longer felt in control but was not ready to admit it. He looked up. Do you know who I am? The words came out desperate rather than commanding. Maya looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Do you know who you are without all of this? She did not wave at his watch or his suit. She did not have to. Everyone in the room understood exactly what she meant. Tariq exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. The couple by the window leaned their heads together, whispering. The man at the bar had given up any pretense of looking at his phone. The restaurant was fully, completely absorbed. Rashid slammed his fork against the plate. Tariq flinched. And then Maya said something that made the room go completely still. She spoke gently, without theatrics, switching back to Arabic for just a moment. My grandmother used to say, the tongue is either a bridge or a wall. You get to choose which one you build. Then in English, loud enough for everyone, she continued. My grandmother raised me in Casablanca after my parents separated. She did not speak English. If I wanted to know her, if I wanted to really be close to her, I had to learn her language. Not study it. Live it. Every morning in the market, every evening with tea, every prayer she said quietly by her window. Arabic is not just something I know. It is part of how I understand love. She paused. Her eyes did not leave Rashid. So when you use that language to cut me down, you are not just insulting me. You are reaching past me and striking something sacred. You are disrespecting the woman who made me who I am. The restaurant went so quiet you could hear the music from the kitchen. A woman a few tables away pressed a napkin to the corner of her eye. An older man near the door bowed his head slightly, slowly. Tariq looked at Rashid with something close to pity. Rashid had no armor left. He looked at his plate. His voice, when it finally came, was barely above a murmur. I did not know. That, Maya said evenly, is exactly the problem. You did not care to know. Charles Vega, the restaurant manager, a steady, silver-haired man in his mid-50s who had been hovering near the bar long enough to hear most of what had passed, walked over to the table with the calm authority of someone who managed difficult situations regularly. Is there a problem here? He asked, positioning himself calmly beside Maya. Rashid straightened immediately, sensing an opportunity to redirect the conversation. Yes. This server decided to make a scene during my meal. I expect a certain level of. Charles did not raise his voice. He simply spoke over the objection with quiet precision. I have been standing nearby long enough to have a clear picture of what happened. And I can tell you that this staff member handled herself with more professionalism than most people would have. A low wave of agreement moved through the nearest tables. Rashid's face went red. You're a server, Rashid said, his eyes back on Maya, his voice low and strained. I am the client. That is how the world works. Maya looked back at him without any rush. That is how you want the world to work. It is not the same thing. Tariq looked at Rashid and said, quietly and plainly, Rashid. You are not winning this. Coming from his own associate, the words carried a weight no strangers could. Rashid's shoulders dropped, just slightly, but enough for the room to notice. Maya crossed her arms loosely, her posture relaxed but grounded. You walked in here expecting silence from everyone who serves you. You assumed that silence meant agreement, that it meant we did not notice or did not care. But we do notice. We always notice. And today I chose not to stay silent. Tariq nodded once, almost to himself. Even Charles gave a quiet, steady look that said everything without a word. Rashid looked around the room. Everywhere he turned, eyes were on him. Not with admiration. Not with the deference he was used to. With judgment, and with something even harder to take, pity. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He had no move left. Charles stepped in cleanly. Sir, you are welcome to remain and finish your meal. But if there is any further disruption, I will ask you to leave. Rashid nodded stiffly, his gaze dropping to the table. And just like that, the billionaire who had walked into the room owning every inch of it was reduced to staring at his own reflection in a water glass. Maya did not linger. She straightened her notepad, tucked her pen behind her ear, and said in the same even voice she used for every customer, "Your lamb will be out shortly." And she walked away. The room exhaled. Forks returned to plates. Conversations restarted, quieter and more thoughtful than before. But the story was not quite finished. The lamb arrived exactly as ordered. Maya carried it out with the same care she gave every meal, set it in front of Rashid without ceremony, and stepped back. Rashid looked up at her. This time the superiority was completely gone. What replaced it was something he was probably not accustomed to feeling in public. Uncertainty. His silverware moved slowly across the plate. Tariq ate in silence, avoiding eye contact with his boss. The only sounds at the table were the soft scrape of cutlery and the low background hum of a restaurant returning to its rhythm. Halfway through the meal, Rashid put his fork down. He looked up. And in Arabic, quietly, without performance, he said, "You speak beautifully." Maya tilted her head gently. It is not the language that is beautiful. It is the intention behind it. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked away. Tariq finally spoke, his voice low and sincere. "Rashid, there are moments that are supposed to change how you think. I believe this might be one of them." Rashid said nothing. He stared out the window at the afternoon streets of Scottsdale, where cabs moved and people walked and life continued with no awareness of what had just happened inside. After a long silence, he said quietly in English, "You might be right." When Maya came to clear the plates, Rashid reached into his jacket and placed several bills on the tray. A large sum. Maya looked at the money, then looked at him, and said evenly, "Respect matters more than tips." She did not take the extra bills. She left what was owed and moved on. Rashid sat with that for a moment. Then, with no audience expecting it, no cameras pointed at him, no associate watching, he gave a single, small nod. It was not a speech. It was not a grand gesture. But it was the closest he had ever come to a genuine apology. When Rashid and Tariq stood to leave, the room did not applaud. Nobody pointed. People just watched them go, quietly, the way you watch the end of something that needed to end. Charles walked past Maya as the door closed and gave her shoulder a brief, firm pat. "Handled like a professional," he said simply. She smiled faintly and went back to work. But what stayed in that room, in every person who sat at those tables that afternoon, was not the conflict. It was the clarity. The reminder that dignity does not live in a bank account or a business card. That the people the world treats as background are often the people carrying the most remarkable stories. That language is never just language. It is memory and identity and love and everything a person has survived. And that respect, real respect, the kind that means something, cannot be demanded. It can only be given. And once lost, no amount of wealth in the world can buy it back. So here is what Black Voices Louder wants to leave with you today. Think about the people who serve you, who hold doors, bring your food, stock your shelves, drive your packages across town. Do you see them, truly see them, or do you look past them the way Rashid did? Because the person you underestimate today might be the one who teaches you the lesson you will carry for the rest of your life. Treat people with dignity. Always. Not because someone is watching, but because it is simply the right thing to do. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the strongest voices are often the ones the world never expected to speak.